Hello, hello. Welcome to Healthy Perspectives, a podcast that takes on current cultural and social issues through a clinical lens. Hello, hello. All right, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, we appreciate your time. And so without further ado, let's start you off with something I think is really interesting. Would you add flour to the cookies before or after you bake them? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Well, because it seems so obvious. Right. Because it is obvious. If you put the flour in after you bake the cookie, the whole thing's going to be all screwed up. Why? Because of your tip of the day. Some things must be baked into the cake or the cookies or the culture or the psyche. They got to be baked into it. You can't just add them at some random time. There's an order of things in many situations. And so today I'm going to risk, irritating many of you because that's what we do. We, not on purpose, but it's often what ends up happening around here. We are going to explain why the Democratic Party, the Democrats, the big D Democrats, are right about something. And I know many of my listeners, they definitely, between neutral and maybe slightly left, neutral, slightly right, which means I have a pretty middle of the run audience for the most part. But the Democrats are right to look at the need for systemic cause. There's a need there. Let me be really blunt with you. The language is things like systemic racism, systemic poverty, systemic wealth, systemic religiosity, systemic abuse, systemic hate. And the Democrats love to talk about that. Well, you know that I am not a political podcast. If you have listened to me for any length of time, you just know that isn't my agenda. I'm not pushing a party. What I am pushing here is a perspective, a healthy perspective. One that this is my hope, allows you the space to understand and grow. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. So let me make the case. There are some things, like we said earlier, that have to be baked in. Morality has to be baked in. Love has to be baked in. Right now, we're seeing a lot of hate baked in. Truth and reality have to be baked in. Not a truth, not your truth, the truth. Truth and reality have to be baked in. There are certain realities that got to get baked in, or we end up with something really disgusting. And unfortunately, in some ways, we have the results of not baking in the right things. So here's where I want to go with this. I want to start with that little short list that framed it. I want to start with something like systemic racism. Well, if racism exists, which it has historically existed in the United States, if racism exists, then there has to be a complete reset. In other words, you got to scrap a good chunk of the old, anything that ties to it, in order to start over. So interesting how it goes. But if you forget an essential ingredient or you add the wrong ingredient, the start over becomes essential, like in systemic racism or systemic poverty, systemic wealth. If you've got these challenges, and every culture has them, there is a start over that has to happen. It doesn't mean you have to scrap the chocolate chips that you didn't put in the cookie. You can keep a lot of pieces of the puzzle. So here's what's really interesting to me. On the individual level, so I'm a psychological content creator. I want you to understand how the individual and the social groupings work, as well as the culture. So individually, what does it look like to scrap what you've done and start over? That's what we call forgiveness. Forgiveness is the process that says, let's start over. Let's have a redo. Do I need to forgive you for existing in order to forgive you for hurting me? No, that would be horrible. Psychologically makes no sense. Sociologically makes no sense. You don't throw the whole thing out. You scrap that area, that one particular area. And you got to make sure you get it all. Okay. That's a tricky part when we get to the cultural piece. Culturally, what this could look like is elections. This is part of the reason why I think there's so many people who underestimate the importance of really good election processes and a lot of renewal in the election process, like a lot. So when I hear about, somebody like, Joe Biden, who, is in a public office for 50 years or whatever it was that he was in the office, that's too much. That's not enough renewal. Frankly, it's just not enough. It's not even close to enough. Now, some people are like, term limits this and term limits that. Like, I'm not a political podcast, but I can tell you that culturally, it doesn't make sense to try to call for a start over when you have the same people all the time. And we often have the same people all the time. And so I got to thinking about this, and I'm gonna shift this a little bit because this really drove me nuts. Uh, I also got to thinking, and I thought about this as possibly the tip of the day too. Is like, you are not informed. Frankly, you're just not. I wish you were, but you're not. And I'm gonna make a case that when it comes to baking the cookies, you don't even know the ingredients. You are not informed. So hang with me for a second. Like, I know I'm coming at you pretty hard, and that's okay. Sometimes that happens. But let me start with something simple. If I say, who are your representatives? Most of you are going, well, the president of the United States and the administrative office. Yay. Wrong. Sorry, but you're wrong. Who are your representatives? Okay, my legislators, my state legislators, my senators, the congressmen that represent my district. Wrong. Sorry, folks. Hang with me. This is important. I did with this new information culturally, this cultural information about judges being activists. I got to thinking, do I know my judges? I'm pretty well informed. When I say judges, I mean at the district level. Do I know my judges? Do I know who they are? Do I know what they stand for? Because let's be real, those are elected positions. So I asked a question, did some research, and discovered that statistically, somewhere between 50 and 80% of the district judges across the United States ran unopposed in their last election. Oh my gosh. What that means is that we are settling for whoever is in front of us. Does that sound like a good model? I'm not sure about that. I mean, the whole idea behind elections is competition. Ideally, competition of ideas, so that when we go to bake the cookie, we know we've got the flour, we got the sugar, we got the vanilla, we got the salt, we've got the butter, we got the eggs. We need the ingredients. And we can't do that if we're supposed to have eggs, but there are no eggs. None, because eggs are too expensive. That was a little joke for you. Hopefully you caught it. Sorry about that. It just happened. So I looked at the district judges in my area, just my area. And I went, only one of the three am I familiar with. Oh, yikes. And I would actually say that maybe I'm fairly well informed, which leads me back to that second possible tip of the day that I was going to go with, which was you are not informed. Do you know who your district judges are? I'll bet you most of you don't. So I decided to put a list of people you should know, local people you should know. You should know your city public health director. But I'll bet you don't. You should know your state mental health commissioner. But I bet you don't. You should know your emergency management director. But again, I'll bet you don't. How about your police chief? I'll bet more of you know your police chief than most of the other positions I've read off for sure. How about your state education commissioner? Do you know who your education commissioner is? I mean, if you've had a problem with what's being taught in a classroom, shouldn't you know that? How about your local fire chief? Maybe, but most of you probably don't. Your attorneys general? How about that? Do you know who your attorney general is? How about your city economic development director? Ooh, that's an interesting one. But I'll bet you don't. Remember, the whole point of this is not to embarrass you. Look, folks, I want to help you. If you don't know your representatives with these titles, you are not informed. And so you go out on, X, or you go out on Instagram, or you go out on any of these Facebook, these social media sites, and you post crap as if you know crap. And you probably don't. Look, I'm being kind of rough because there's more. Your environmental agency director, your school superintendent, and it depends on what district you're in. You could have several of them around you nearby. How about your Medicaid director, or your city housing authority director, or state transportation commissioner? There are so many positions, local positions, and I'll bet you don't know who they are. Your VA director, your city parks director, your state workforce development director, your library director, your public defender chief. Folks, I'm not doing this because I want to embarrass you. That's not the point. The point is, you're not informed. Neither are the people around you for the most part. These are our public representatives. Do you know a business owner? A few business owners? If you don't, shouldn't you? It's a good idea to have your feelers out there to say, who are the people baking the stuff into our cookies, into our cake, into our bread? Because we can't really address things like systemic racism systemic poverty, systemic religiosity, systemic abuse. How about spiritual abuse? Systemic hate. We can't address those at the national level and think that it's going to be effective. They have to be addressed first at the local level. Remember, I've told you this before, if you've been following me with any kind of frequency. It starts psychology, sociology, culture. Downstream from culture is politics. We get it all backwards. If you want to bake the right things into our dough, you're going to have to get more informed. There's just no way around it, folks. And unfortunately, as the second tip of the day would read, you're not informed. You're just not. And for those of you that are, and you find this insulting, write that list without looking it up. I couldn't even do it. And I'm pretty well informed comparatively to most of the people I know. And I know a lot of people. I knew 1 out of my 3 district judges. 1. That's sad. I probably saw the other 2 names on a ballot, and they were probably running unopposed. And I don't know if they're extremists, if they're conservatives. I don't know. I wouldn't even be able to tell you if they're Democrats or Republicans, libertarians or constitutionalists or unaffiliated. I wouldn't be able to tell you that. My hope here in doing this is to give you a glimpse, to have you take a look at what needs to be baked in and what needs to be started over, and then encourage you psychologically and sociologically. Do the forgiveness work. Culturally, vote, get informed, know who your local reps are, put them in your phone and speed dial them. It's the only logical sequence of events when we talk to you about baking things into the cookies or the cake or the bread. It's the only logical option. I hope this was helpful. I hope it wasn't too intense. And my hope is even greater than that. It's my hope that you will make a list of the people in the positions that I read off. Make a list of your people, the people who are supposed to work for you. Some of those are public officials. Some of those are non-elected positions. Like the school superintendent, that's a non-elected position. And yet they have all this influence. You got to get informed and you got to know who they are. It's just got to happen. Make a list. And your public officials, put them in speed dial. I hope this was helpful. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. We appreciate our audience a lot, so we give you some simple ways to track us down. Please like, subscribe, and follow all the podcasts on different platforms, but you can also email us at healthyperspectives@protonmail.com, or you can check out our website at healthy-perspectives.com/podcast. It's a backward slash. So if you want to go to our landing page, if you go to healthy-perspectives.com, you'll still find us. You just got to click on the podcast button. Thank you so much.